Have you ever felt like something was watching you from the darkness? Shadows that don't belong, moving just out of sight? What if they weren't a trick of the light? Today we're diving into chilling stories of shadowy figures that have haunted people's lives. So, grab a blanket, settle in, and if you're ready, let's begin. I've carried this story with me for over 50 years, buried deep in the recesses of my mind, where the light of day couldn't reach it. It's strange, the things we try to forget. They have a way of sticking with you. I was young when it happened, barely 20, and full of the arrogance that only youth can afford. You know what I mean. I had just graduated from college, and like most young men of that age, I was itching to get out into the world, to prove myself. My first job was at a logging camp deep in the forests of Oregon, miles from the nearest town. The pay was decent and the work was hard, but that's what I wanted, to test my strength, to feel like a man. The camp was a rough place, no comforts to speak of. Just a few ramshackle cabins and a mess hall, all surrounded by towering pines that seemed to stretch on forever. There were maybe 20 of us there, most of us young, all of us strong, and none of us afraid of a little hard labor. We'd work from dawn until dusk, felling trees, stripping them of their branches, and hauling them to the river. By the time night fell, we were too tired to do much more than eat and crawl into our bunks. It wasn't long before I started hearing the stories. The other men would talk about strange things happening in the woods, unexplained noises, shadows moving where no shadows should be. I laughed it off, of course. I'd grown up in the city. The woods were just trees and animals, nothing more. But the older men, the ones who'd been around a few seasons, they didn't laugh. They'd exchange glances, their faces dark with something that looked an awful lot like fear. It was Old Man Nelson who first told me about the shadows. He was a grizzled veteran of the logging camps, with more stories than I had years. One night, after a long day's work, we were sitting around the fire, just the two of us. The others had already gone to bed, but I liked listening to his tales, even if I didn't believe half of them. He spoke in his low, gravelly voice, like the crunch of gravel underfoot, asking if I had ever seen them yet. Confused, I asked what he was talking about. He then mentioned the shadows, explaining how they come out at night, just when the light starts to fade. According to him, they weren't animals or men. They were something else entirely. I laughed it off, shaking my head, dismissing his story as just another ghost tale meant to scare me. But Nelson didn't laugh. He just stared into the fire, his face flickering in the light, and quietly insisted that they were out there, always watching. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the ramblings of an old man who'd spent too many years alone in the woods. But his words stuck with me, like a splinter under the skin, impossible to ignore. I told myself it was nonsense, but that didn't stop me from glancing over my shoulder every now and then, from feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end when the light began to fade. It was a few nights later when I saw them for the first time. I was on night watch, something we took turns doing to keep an eye on the equipment. The moon was full, casting long shadows through the trees, and the camp was quiet. Too quiet. I was making my rounds when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the others, moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, a trick of the moonlight. But then I saw another and another. They were moving, not with the random sway of the trees, but with purpose, like they were alive. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt that cold, creeping fear I hadn't known since I was a child, afraid of the dark. I tried to tell myself it was just animals, maybe wolves or a bear, but deep down, I knew better. These shadows, they were shaped like men, but there was something wrong about them. They were too tall, too thin, and they moved in a way that no living thing should. I wanted to call out, to wake the others, but my voice was trapped in my throat, strangled by fear. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, watching those shadows glide silently through the trees. Time seemed to stretch, like I was caught in a dream I couldn't wake from. Then, Just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, melting back into the darkness like they'd never been there at all. When I finally found my voice, I told the others what I'd seen, but they just laughed, clapping me on the back and telling me I'd had too much to drink. No one believed me. No one but the old man. I never spoke about it again. Not then. Not for the next 50 years. What could I say? That I'd seen things in the woods, things that shouldn't exist? People would think I was crazy, or worse, that I was making it up for attention. So I kept it to myself, burying the memory deep, trying to forget. But some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. I can still feel that cold fear, that certainty that I was seeing something that wasn't meant to be seen. I don't know what they were, spirits, demons, something else entirely. All I know is that they were real and that they're still out there, somewhere in those deep dark woods, watching, waiting. I've lived a long life since then, and I've seen a lot of things, but nothing has ever scared me as much as those things did. I've served in the military for over 25 years, and in that time, I've seen my share of strange things, but nothing comes close to what I encountered during a routine patrol in the mountains of Afghanistan. I'm not a man who scares easily. You can't afford to be in my line of work, but what I saw that night, I've never spoken of. It's not something I can explain, not something I can even fully comprehend, but it's something I'll never forget. It was late 2009, and I was stationed at a remote outpost in the Hindu Kush, a rugged and unforgiving range of mountains that seemed to go on forever. Our job was to patrol the area, keep an eye out for an insurgent activity, and maintain a presence in the region. It was dangerous work, but it was the kind of job I'd trained my whole life for. High stakes, high pressure, and always on edge. That particular night I was leading a small squad on a routine patrol. We were about 6 miles from the outpost, deep in the mountains, the air thin and cold. The moon was out, casting an eerie glow on the rocky terrain, making everything look like it was carved out of silver. There was something unsettling about the landscape, something that made your skin crawl if you looked at it too long. But I was used to the unease. It came with the territory. We were making our way through a narrow valley, the walls rising steeply on either side, when I noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the mountains, wind, distant animal calls, had fallen silent, leaving an oppressive, almost tangible quiet. My men noticed it too. You could see it in their faces. We were all trained to trust our instincts, and right then every one of us was on high alert. We pressed on, moving carefully, our eyes scanning the darkness. That's when we saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark shape moving at the edge of our vision, too far to make out clearly. I called for a halt, and we all crouched down, weapons at the ready, eyes locked on the spot where we'd seen the movement. The shape appeared again, closer this time. It was large, human-sized, but there was something off about it. One of my men whispered, asking if we should engage, but I held up my hand. Engage with what? There was no threat. Not yet. Just this thing. My pulse was pounding in my ears, every instinct screaming that something wasn't right, but I couldn't order an attack on something I didn't even understand. It moved with a strange, unsettling grace, and then, without warning, it stopped. It didn't dissolve into the darkness or blend into the rocks like I'd hoped it would. Instead, it slowly turned, as if it sensed our presence. It was looking right at us. For a moment, the world seemed to hang in the balance. No one moved. No one even breathed. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow turned away and continued its glide through the valley, disappearing into the darkness, as if it had never been there. We stayed there, frozen in place, for what felt like an eternity, waiting for it to come back, waiting for something to happen. But the night remained quiet, unnaturally so, until I finally gave the order to move. When we returned, I debriefed my commanding officer, but I kept the details vague. What could I say? that we'd seen a shadow in the mountains, a shadow that moved like no living thing should. I've never been one for tall tales or ghost stories, and I wasn't about to start. I've seen combat, I've seen the worst humanity has to offer, and I've kept my sanity through it all. But that shadow, it stuck with me, a mystery I can't solve, a memory I can't shake. I've always prided myself on being a man of logic, a man who trusts what he can see and touch and understand. But after that night, I've had to accept that there are things out there, things in the dark, in the places we can't fully understand, that don't play by the rules of this world. It all started about a year ago. At first, I didn't think much of it, just a feeling of unease, like I was being watched when I was alone in my apartment. I'd moved in a few months prior, a small one-bedroom in an older building on the edge of town. It wasn't the most modern place, but it had character and the rent was affordable. I liked that it was quiet, away from the hustle and bustle of downtown. But soon after settling in, things began to change. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing for no apparent reason. Sometimes I'd feel this strange pressure in the room, like the air was heavier. Other nights I'd hear faint whispers, just at the edge of hearing, but when I'd sit up and listen, there'd be nothing. I chalked it up to stress from work, or maybe just the creaking of an old building settling, but it was hard to ignore the feeling that something was off. One night I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I felt it again, that heaviness. It was as if the darkness in my room was thicker, more oppressive. I tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I rolled over, squeezing my eyes shut, and tried to force myself to sleep. But just as I was drifting off, I saw it. At first, it was just a blur in my peripheral vision, a dark shape standing in the corner of my room. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but not quite. There were no eyes, no face, just a shadow, darker than the darkness around it. I blinked, and it was gone. I sat up, breathing heavily, and scanned the room. Nothing, just the faint outline of furniture in the dim light. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just a trick of the light, or my tired mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to brush it off, but the image of that dark figure stayed with me. I went about my day as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I got home that evening, the apartment felt different, colder, emptier, like something had been there while I was gone. That night, I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows before going to bed. I told myself it was just a precaution, but I knew it was more than that. I was scared. As I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I tried to convince myself that what I had seen was just a dream or a hallucination. But as the hours ticked by and I drifted off to sleep, I felt it again. That pressure, that weight in the room. This time I didn't open my eyes. I lay there, my heart pounding, listening to the silence, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then I felt it, a cold, creeping sensation, like someone or something was standing right next to my bed, watching me. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and I wanted to turn and look, but I was too scared to move. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The sunlight was streaming in through the blinds, and everything seemed normal again, but I knew that something wasn't right. I started sleeping with a light on, thinking that maybe it would help, but it didn't. The feeling of being watched only intensified, and the shadowy figure started appearing more often. Sometimes I'd see it out of the corner of my eye, just a flicker of movement in the hallway, or a dark shape lurking in the bathroom mirror. Other times, it would be more direct. A shadow passing through the room, dark and fast, like a cloud blocking out the sun for just a moment. every time my heart would skip a beat, and I'd feel that same cold fear, like something was squeezing the air out of my lungs. I tried to rationalize it, to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a side effect of stress or lack of sleep. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the more it happened, the harder it was to believe that. I even talked to a doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong with me. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Then, one night, it happened again. I was sitting on the couch, watching TV, trying to distract myself from the fear that had become a constant companion. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to that familiar feeling of being watched. I opened my eyes, and there it was, standing in the doorway to my bedroom, a tall, dark figure, just a shadow against the light. I blinked, and for a moment it didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, like it was waiting for something. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow vanished. I was left sitting there, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat on the couch, staring at the empty doorway, waiting for it to come back. I tried to talk to people about it, but no one believed me. They said it was just stress, just my imagination. Now, I'm not sure what to think. That's it for today's creepy stories. Have you ever had a moment where you saw something in the corner of your eye? Let me know in the comments. I'm super curious. If you enjoyed the stories, please subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Stay safe out there, and maybe keep a light on.